purpose and your promise to deliver what matters for people and our planet. Volunteering 30 million hours and planting 50 million trees by 2030. 1 billion by 2040. And going 100% carbon neutral by 2050. Big goals for a brighter future. It starts by doing what's right and holding ourselves accountable. Getting it done with creative thinkers, problem solvers, and those who think way outside the box. Making sure everyone has a seat, a voice, and belongs. That's our purpose, that's our promise. Change it everywhere, and it starts right here.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our roundtable number one, dialogue session number one on day one of the Pacific Basin Economic Council Dialogue Summit for 2022. I'm so happy to see everybody, so familiar faces joining from all around the region. We've got people from Australia like Peter Liddell and Professor Neale O'Connor in Malaysia. We've got William Klein, who's joined us. So thankful for this, from Berlin, of all places in Europe. Probably stayed up and watched the World Cup to stay awake, I guess. And then Anna Lin here in Hong Kong with us from GS1, and of course our moderator Anson Bailey. And next to him, who have we got? You're on mute, Anson. Sorry.
A very good morning to everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with all of you this morning. I am your moderator. This is our roundtable discussion number one on Unchained Global Sourcing, charting a new course here in Asia Pacific. I am delighted to be joined by Regine Picard, the regional head of lead logistics at AP Moller Maersk, here in Hong Kong. So Regine is with me in the KPMG studio. But Mike, as you said, we've got people all around joining us today. We've got Dr. Professor Neale O'Connor, professor at Monash University over in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. We have been working very closely with Neale on a number of different collaborations. But one of the things that we want to talk to everyone about today is this new paper, Mike, that we're doing together with PBEC membership, along with Monash University and the KPMG team, looking at those trends. What are we seeing regarding those supply chains and sourcing and manufacturing? I'm also delighted to be joined by my very good friend, Anna Lin, the CEO of GS1 here in Hong Kong. I'm sure all of you have heard about the GS1 team with regards to supply chains. I think Anna will tell you that they have been, they've renamed themselves a few times over the years. But again, we've been working and collaborating very closely with Anna Lin. And then we've also got Bill Klein. And Bill is joining, as you said, from Berlin. So Bill, this is a massive thank you for joining us in the middle of the night for you. And I was going to say we had a, I should say we've got the FIFA World Cup going on. So Bill, we should talk football very quickly. Did you watch that US game? Did you watch the USA play Wales last night?
Yes, I did, Anson, and it was very, very painful to watch, but it's only a start.
It's the beginning, and not to worry, because you face England on Friday. I'm looking forward to the England USA game, Bill. Perhaps we can have a little wager on it, but we'll have a chat later on. But also, last but not least, we're also joined by, again, my very good friend and colleague, Peter Liddell. And Peter is heading up our Global Operations Center of Excellence in supply chain, procurement, and operational excellence. Peter's joining us from Melbourne, Australia, but Peter has worked all around the region. He's also worked in Shanghai for several years. So again, I'm absolutely delighted, Mike, that we have got such a distinguished group of panel members today to talk us through. Now, what I want to do right now is I just want to set the scene. I want to share a few of my thoughts in terms of what are we seeing in the market. I also will just spend the next 20 minutes to give everybody a quick view. And then, of course, I'm going to go back and talk to our distinguished panel members to get their thoughts on things. So without further ado, I'm going to share the screen right now, and I'm going to talk you through what we are seeing. And maybe I should very quickly kick off with the first slide, of course, PBEC Dialogue Summit. But if I move forward very quickly, I just want to mention to you that we are seeing these new green consumers, and my clicker is not working. I think, okay, great. So, okay, so we're seeing these new green consumers emerge in 2022. I spent a lot of time talking about millennial consumers being a very big consumer base, but we're now seeing this next generation, the Gen Z consumers. They're emerging in China, but they're also emerging across the world. And depending which investment bank report you read, there are either 270, 280, or even 300 million of these Gen Z consumers. We're also going to see those populations rising across the whole of ASEAN as well, hitting 726 million, literally, coming up by 2030. And last year, we saw the adoption of more online consumers than ever before. So I think that is a key message. But I also want to say that these Gen Z consumers are far more socially aware than their predecessors. They are tech savvy, they're digitally minded, and they are watching all of you as the brands, as the retailers, and they are prepared to call you out for bad behavior or just not doing stuff that they feel you should be doing. E-commerce, again, as a percentage of retail sales, continues to grow across the AsPAC region. We saw that Southeast Asia grew 17% in the last 5 years, and we're going to continue to see those e-commerce sales growth numbers in 2021, 2022, and beyond. It's interesting that Southeast Asia is topping worldwide e-commerce growth. And again, we will come back and talk about what we're seeing in terms of China, but also what are we seeing in terms of Southeast Asia and ASEAN. Equally, we're seeing some really interesting trends around travel and consumer spending. Yes, it's depressed in other parts of the world, but we've seen that consumer spending in ASEAN is experiencing a recovery in terms of retail, travel, and entertainment. We're also seeing some interesting new emerging markets like Hainan. And of course, Hainan is off the coast of South China, and that's really become a hot destination for those Chinese consumers. And again, we will talk about those Chinese consumers a little bit later. The other thing I just want to mention, and I want to get the views of our panel, is the impact of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. That, I think, is going to play a pivotal role for all of us here in Asia. And we saw that agreement signed in November 15th, 2022, but we're starting to see it being rolled out this year. The creation of this new free trade zone, a third of the world's population, 29% global GDP, that is fated to rise to nearly 50% by 2030. And we're also talking about the elimination of a range of tariffs on various imports over the next several years. So just setting the scene. Now, as I mentioned, we also have launched a couple of new reports. Last week, Anna, Lynn, and myself were involved in launching this new paper on retail recharged. And Anna, if you remember, the key message was engaging consumers with technology, purpose, and trust. And they were the key findings of our survey. And Anna, I'm not too sure if you and I presented last week, but what were some of the key messages that you heard from that retail recharge paper?
Actually, some echo to what you said earlier regarding the consumers today. First, I think you mentioned about the Gen Z. I think most of the Gen Z, because this survey covers both Hong Kong as well as 9 cities in the GBA area. So they are, most consumers regard themselves very digital savvy. At the same time, the online, offline, we do need them together, but consumers today are more comfortable with shopping online as well, although they won't do totally without offline. The other one, which is interesting, that has a lot of commonality with the other report, is that the green consumers. We also see, because this year we have also covered about sustainability, and we see that the consumers today do want to associate, the purpose of the organization, and they would more aspire to companies who opt for ESG products, but one interesting point, Anson, if you remember, that consumers do not want to pay extra for ESG product. Instead, they want to be rewarded, if they support sustainable purchases, isn't it, Anson?
Yeah. Absolutely, Anna. And I think that's a great point, because one of the questions that we raised last week, Anna, is who's going to pay for it?
Yes.
Who is going to pay? Is it going to be the manufacturers, the shippers, the sourcing companies, the retailers, the brands, or the consumers? So right now, there is an interesting discussion around who is going to pay for this. But as you said, Anna, those consumers are expecting more sustainable products. And when we did our survey, and this was of thousands of consumers across the GBA area. One of the key messages was that those consumers expected a number of actions. They expected those manufacturers and the brands and the retailers to start using more eco-friendly, recycled and recyclable materials. And of course, the packaging as well, more sustainable packaging. And they were also expecting you to inform them about the carbon impact of their purchases. So again, I think, Anna, this is what we heard last week, and Anna hosted the GS1 annual summit with literally, again, hundreds and hundreds of delegates in person at the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center. So I do think there were some really key messages. And also, Anna, quick one for you, because we talked about data previously, but data analytics is still very important, isn't it?
Yes, I think as we all know, I think data today plays a very important, it's like a new currency, that because we need to analyze the data in order to be more effective, to be more informed, to make a better business decision. We also see the trend that not only just the use of data, but we see the trend of more increasing investment from what we call the descriptive data analytics, that is to tell us, what we are doing, to more prescriptive, or even more moving to business intelligence, the BI, to enable management to predict how can they be better prepared for future. So it's also interesting, as you can see in this slide, that not only that, companies are also investing in understanding the analytics on the supply chain footprint relating to the ESG sustainability. So I think not only to support the day-to-day business, but also to really look into the opportunity of sustainability. Another area, Anson, if you remember, not only on the data analytics, is when we talk about data, is the number one challenge of companies today is really data security. Companies these days collect a lot of data because they need to understand the consumer preference, the consumer's footprint. But at the same time, I think consumers, if we want to enhance trust of the consumers and the brand, the companies need to have a better protection, or better protection of the data security, in order to add confidence to the consumer that the data is only used to enhance the consumer experience, not for anything else. And I think just like the ESG, the companies, the brands need to convey this message that their data that they collect from the consumers are well protected and only used to serve them better, and not for, same as the ESG communication, as you said early on.
Absolutely, Anna. And I love that point that you just made, is that, yes, data security came up as a very key driver, but also there was a very clear message to those businesses that if you want to enhance trust with the consumers, you have got to ensure and demonstrate that you are very focused on protecting that data and the data governance as well, Anna. So that was really a great point. Thank you for sharing. We also heard lots of different voices, Anna and myself and other the other team members. We actually went out and we spoke to those CEOs, those C-level executives, to get their views. We spoke to the traditional businesses, but we also spoke to some really interesting, innovative startups. Anna, if you remember, last week on the CEO panel, we welcomed Crystal Pang, the CEO and co-founder of Pickup. And they are building this open, efficient, holistic supply chain network. And it was quite interesting. If you remember, Anna, we asked Crystal, is she a logistics company or is she a technology company? She said, actually, we're a technology company looking to solve those logistics bottlenecks. So again, I think there's some really interesting discussions. We also met people like Palak Seth from PDS. And again, PDS was able to offer end-to-end, right? They're able to offer the manufacturing, the sourcing, to build up a platform of fashion brands. So those platforms are also growing in numbers. So I do think there was some really great sharing. And I also just want to very quickly just share a very interesting interview that we conducted with Anne-Laure Decours. And Anne-Laure is the Chief Sourcing Officer at Puma. She is a member of the company's management board, but she is overseeing everything around the sourcing for the brand. She's overseeing the sustainability strategy and the implementation based here in Hong Kong. And I think her key messages were that, you know, she was saying that 70% of the carbon emissions in Puma's apparel and footwear are being created at that supply chain level. So I think three key messages we heard from Anne-Laure, Anna, was collaboration is absolutely essential to satisfy the consumer's sustainability expectations. Gen Z is the most engaged group ever, right, at the consumer level, and they did a workshop in London with those Gen Zs. But also, Anne-Laure mentioned new innovations, new technologies. We need to use them to ensure that we kind of create new opportunities around product development and material innovation, and better, you know, potentially using those waste resources and turning them around. So we had a fascinating discussion with Anne-Laure. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, what we are seeing is that today Asia is becoming this growing consumer hub, but it's also this tech and innovation hub. We're having some really interesting conversations about the metaverse and NFTs, but actually we're really talking to a lot of those corporates about ESG and sustainability. We're talking to them about IoT smart devices, and there are going to be 32 billion IoT smart devices by 2025. We're talking about smart cities. We're talking about smart supply chains. We're also, of course, talking around product development and, as I said, material innovation. That's going to be key in that smart manufacturing. So again, the rise of startups is not just the big corporates. We need to look at tech and innovation. We need to collaborate with these startups. And there's some really interesting startups out there. But what I would say to everybody, we're also now seeing this convergence of the business models. And for me, I think that's really interesting because we have seen the B2B to C. And of course, the Chinese government are providing a lot of tax incentives for bonded e-commerce imports. So that's providing a boom. We're also seeing more options as industry players are building their own platforms instead of using those traditional giant e-commerce platforms. I already talked about the rise of the Gen Zs with preference to tailor-made products, but that's also changing the landscape of B2B commerce. And we're also seeing C2C, right? In terms of the technology and the innovation that's reducing logistics costs and creating this circular economy, giving a welcome boost to C2C e-commerce. So there's a lot of things going on, but now I just want to pause there because, of course, the main entree is our new report that is actually going to get released. We're going to give you a sneak preview right now. But
Anson,
yes, Anna.
Just an interruption, you know, for the benefit of the audience, I just wonder whether you would like to share the QR code so that the audience can scan and download the report.
Anna, that's a great idea. I will absolutely show the QR code. And in fact, I think, hopefully I did, but what I will do, yes, On the slide, the retail recharge slide, I did have the QR code, Anna, but we will show it. We will show it again. Thank you. Thank you. Good observation.
So that we can share with the entire PBEC community.
Absolutely. And Anna, what we will do is we'll make sure that that retail recharge paper does get shared with everybody. I will have a chat with the chief executive, Mike Walsh, and make sure it goes to all the PBEC members. But moving forward, and thank you, Anna, moving forward, I also want to just introduce my good friend, Dr. Professor Neale O'Connor, professor at Monash University. Neale has been slaving away working on this paper, but I've known Neale for many years, and Neale actually, when we could travel across China, Neale visited hundreds and hundreds of factories across China, and he interviewed those factory managers. He interviewed those leading manufacturers to kind of get a view on what was happening on the ground. So again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Neale. Neale, maybe if you can, just in the next 5 minutes, let's give everybody here on the PBEC webinar a little bit of a sense of what we saw with regards to the key messages from this global sourcing paper.
Thank you, Anson, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are. I wanted to, one more thing I did with in China, Anson, was I got even more curious in interviewing. I actually started auditing factories for clients around the world because I wanted to be hands-on in understanding what's going on in this area of the world. But this sourcing report that we have put together is based on statements by C-level managers in annual reports, media documented. We've collected over 690 statements from C-level managers, and basically it's telling us the reasons for why they are moving, shifting capacity across the region, for the most part, moving capacity out of China. Now, this isn't an anti-China story. This is called a great decentralization story, I would call it. It's a way of mitigating risk according to many, many factors. And we document over 230 market moves, that is moves by 132 companies of capacity from China to different markets around the region, including USA, Mexico, South America. And for the most part, the dominant of these moves are multi-country because the China footprint is so large, you just cannot replace it. So it is a decentralization story. It's a China +1, +2, +3 story. For long and short of it, Vietnam dominates as a huge recipient of over 70 moves out of the 232 markets. And the other big countries are Chinese Taipei, Thailand, Mexico, USA, and India. And another big thing I want to bring to the attention, a big trend that we are observing, is India is back on the drawing board for where to source from. And it may not have been there 5 years ago or more because of the challenges with logistics, because its port capacity is only 10 million TEU compared to China's 150. But now India is attracting a lot of moves, especially in the high-end electronics area, driven by Apple and other dominant brand names. You know, Vietnam, North Vietnam is another big highlight because in the past, South Vietnam was always the big recipient of FDI, footwear and apparel dominating that, but electronics going into North Vietnam. These are two big highlights going forward, Anson.
Yeah, great point, Neale. Thank you very much. And as you said, Neale, this was, as you said, this massive decentralization type strategy, but this is not something that's happened overnight, is it? You and I have been seeing this over many years, and a lot of those corporates have always talked about, we need to have a China +1, a China +2, China +3, China +4 type strategy. And equally, it is interesting because we have seen some interesting moves, haven't we? We've seen some new markets, some new places, but equally, we've also seen those existing locations being ramped up. And again, as you said, Neale, I think Vietnam has been a big benefactor, but equally, just as you said with India, the interesting thing we're seeing is infrastructure. And the fact is that if you've got limited port capacity, you need to plan for that in the future. And I'm sure Regine and the rest of the team have got some comments a little bit later on in terms of what are we seeing around perhaps the changing port capacities. But Neale, the other interesting thing is you asked a lot of questions, as you always do, but you were also asking those senior executives. As you said, you had collected 690 statements from management, but you also asked them, well, you know, why is it that you're moving? Do you want to just share with us some of the key messages there?
I think the first key message is, like, there's no move on one factor alone. It's always, on average, 3 different factors that are driving the move. You can call it a perfect storm of reasons to move that was never around 5 or more years ago. Perfect storm. Geopolitics, push factors, and pull factors. There was always 2 of those factors around all the time, but you know, in the last 4 or 5 years, it has been all 3 that have been driving these moves, and that's highly documented. Like, over, if we look across the 232 market moves, on geopolitics dominates 50% of the reasons, push factors 25%. That means factors associated with the sourcing and supply chain management conditions in China, and the pull factors that are associated with the market they are moving to, making up another 25%. So you get the 50, 25, 25. And what is really interesting when you dig into these reasons is how different parts of Asia, different countries are actually taking advantage of these pull factors. They're taking advantage of this perfect storm, like rolling out the red carpet of tax incentives, which Vietnam and India are doing, Indonesia's doing, but Malaysia is not. And so, you know, there are different things that we can learn from the success that some of these countries are having in actually attracting the FDI and rolling out the red carpet.
Yeah, very, very good point, Neale. And as you said, it's kind of this perfect storm, but it's not just one reason. As you said, it's not just down to geopolitics. It's actually down to a combination of different factors when we've been talking to those business leaders.
These factors are always out there, and we were talking about that a decade ago in Made in Asia conference, Anson. So you always
absolutely
talk, you know.
So
yeah,
I do think that's interesting, Neale, in the fact that you and I 10 years ago were talking about these issues at Made in Asia. And you know, those, as I said, with those issues, they haven't gone away, but they have multiplied. So absolutely. I do think that it's a more complex supply chain that we're dealing with today. And Neale, do you want to just talk to this slide? Because again, this is one of your groovy slides, one of your charts in terms of what are you seeing in terms of those factory shifts. And it's also interesting because it's also meant a shift in labor demand as well, right?
Yeah, we wanted to get a little bit more granularity on these moves. Like in the past, we'd say, oh, well, someone's moved to Vietnam. Is that equivalent to someone moving to India? So we wanted to try and estimate the equivalent factory capacity in terms of people on the ground that would need to be ramped up for the factory and the market they're moving to. So what we're noticing here is that if we don't count the number of market moves and we just count the equivalent number of people, the electronics industry is dominating and Vietnam is dominated. But very close by is India, Thailand, Chinese Taipei. What is interesting is actually when you pull it apart even further, Vietnam dominates in terms of the number of moves. India doesn't dominate with the number of moves, but it dominates with the size of each move. In some ways, India is a choice for a multinational supply chain location, whereas Vietnam is actually covering SME and multinational options as well. So that's what we see with electronics going to Vietnam, India, Thailand, obviously dominant recipients, USA is up there, but footwear is a mover, as well as, components and auto that, take a little bit longer and larger planning to go with that, because electronics can cover consumer electronics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Neale. And again, one of the things I just wanted to mention is that we have been looking at those export numbers. We were a couple of years ago, Neale, we looked at what were those export numbers back in 2020. And it was quite interesting is that you can see there, mainland China, was very, very much the key player. I always term it as the gorilla in the room. The reality is that, yes, those other markets are catching up. And when we looked at those new numbers right now, you could see that, again, mainland China, guess what? Those exports have continued to grow and develop. But so has the rest of Asia. So, that for me, I think is equally interesting. And again, people always say, well, it's the end of China, people are not going to be manufacturing and sourcing from China. The reality is that people continue to manufacture and source in China. But as you said, Neale, there is this mitigation and risk mitigation where now we are seeing China +1, China +2, China +3. We're also seeing key clusters emerging. This is another interesting dynamic because we looked at a number of those different clusters. Yes, Tokyo Bay Area was a very significant cluster, but as we all know, the Greater Bay Area, GBA, the 9 cities in South China with Hong Kong SAR and Macau SAR, that is a very significant population number, 86 million. And also those GDP numbers are continuing to rise. And when we were talking about the IoT, right? IoT connected devices, I already mentioned to you by 2025, we're looking at nearly 32 billion IoT connected devices. So we're going to see a large number of them coming out of that Greater Bay Area. But equally, we are going to see a diversification. And that is something we are going to see. But again, Asia continues to scale up according to, all of our research. And Neale has been very, very closely monitoring all of this. But the reality is that China continues to be the powerhouse of exports as well. So the demise of China, not quite happening today or tomorrow or the next day. But of course, there are a number of changes that we are seeing right now. And we are going to see the geopolitics. And I know I'm going to have a really good conversation with Bill a little bit later on to get his views on the marketplace. Equally, I also felt the need to talk a little bit about COP27 because we've just finished COP27 at the beginning of the weekend. They have now got an overarching agreement. Of course, there's a commitment to limit global warming to 1.5, but not easy, really not easy. So again, how should the sourcing industry, the manufacturing industry the shipping industry. How can we help? Because right now, ladies and gentlemen, we have this perfect ESG storm. It's here. Climate change is here. And what I've seen is bankers now demanding far more from those manufacturers. They want to see those sustainable agendas. We're seeing more socially aware consumers. They're demanding change. We're also seeing far greater media scrutiny than ever before. We're seeing those changing stakeholder values and views. And your own people, right? All of your workforce today, they're asking more questions. Are you a purpose-led company? So again, there's a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of complexity in supply chains. So again, where do we start? And again, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone for joining us today. And I also want to return to our panel for their observations and opinions as well. So with that, Regine, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Anson.
Great to see you today. It's no secret that businesses have experienced a tumultuous couple of years. They've been dealing with a lot of challenges in the Asia region. They're dealing with the long tail of COVID. And I think it's fair to say that COVID has accelerated everything digitally. Now, that's maybe a good thing, but we're also seeing COVID impacting shipping. It's impacting logistics. I think some of the key messages we've heard is, how can we build more resilience around those supply chains? Having heard our presentation, and I saw you scribbling down notes, what's your thoughts right now? What are you seeing at AP Moller Maersk?
At AP Moller Maersk, well, first of all, we are responding here to what our customers, right, are looking forward, and they definitely look forward here how we could support them in building this supply chain resilience. I think there is a need, definitely, and let me share with you a very important fact that I always been keeping in mind is that there are 184 million is the average general cost of supply chain disruption to each organization. 184 million. And so there is a need to build that supply chain resilience. But what does it mean? It means, first of all, to have a deep understanding of all of the stakeholders across the supply chain and understand the contingency planning to ensure that the time to market is not disrupted, regardless of the supply chain disruption. And how do we do this? I would say above all here is to identify the dependencies and the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And to look into this, we always look, in fact, at 4 levels. And here sharing, in fact, best practices that we have been putting in place and that we've been able to support our customers with these best practices. So the first, in fact, pillars is to always understand the premises, right? So how is the contingency built around the premises, the ports, the distribution centers, the factories, but not only around the premises, but around the cities, right? And we have heard that you could continue manufacturing, you could continue, in fact, load a truck to carry goods to the ports, but if the city is locked down, nothing is going to move. And then it's also about beyond the city, the province, the state, and the country. So it's very important to understand how to continue, in fact, the progress of shipping goods throughout from the premises and through all of these different frontiers. We also look a lot at the technology. All right, but technology, let's be a bit more precise about what it means. It means above all about the data exchange, the continuity of the data exchange. And Anna earlier talked about cybersecurity. It's all about having a resilient, right, technology system to support all of the continuous transfer of data. The third pillar here, it's people. So strikes, but also pandemics, and understanding how, in fact, we lift the people from one situation to another situation is also very important in building that overall resilience program. The third parties, your partners in across the business, the vendors, the manufacturers, the raw materials suppliers. So it's very important to understand how dependent then your supply chain is with all of these stakeholders, and assessing all of this risk and assessing, in fact, all of these bottlenecks is what, in fact, Maersk has been developing in continuing, in fact, leading the logistics for all of our customers. They are critical questions. I think every company today, every business needs to go through this, I would say, do you know critical questions? Do you know which are the critical elements of dependency of your supply chain, the vendors, the service suppliers? Do you know what alternatives to take in case, in fact, you lose dependencies, and how to activate, right? Do you also understand the risk attached to each of these dependency, and do you know how to monitor this risk? And do you have a team in place, a structured team in place, and structured processes to go through all of these dependencies? So it's a bit of, I would say, there is a methodology, but this methodology definitely enable our customers to understand the impact in case of a disruption in the supply chain.
Regine, good, really good sharing there. Do you know? I think that's a very key question, isn't it? Do you know your business? Do you know your supply chains? Do you know your vendors, your suppliers? Thank you. And that, as you said, the third pillar being the people as well. That's something we always need to remember. Peter, I really wanted to bring you in to the conversation, my friend. You know, you've talked a lot about supply chain and supply chain responses to the pandemic being reactive with those stopgap measures. So what do companies need to do now as we look to build up more resiliency around those supply chains?
Yes, Anson, absolutely. Look, what amazes me the most is that, you know, and I've been working with many global supply chains, regional and even domestic supply chains, and I'm still amazed that 1 in 4, and this is as, you know, as late as last year, 1 in 4 organizations still hadn't analyzed the reason for their supply chain breakdown, their key choke points. So they're continuously exposed to the same you know, risk or variability, vulnerability in their supply chain happening over and over again. What really amazes me is we've only just completed a new global supply chain survey. 50% of the companies that were surveyed still have not built resiliency into their supply chains. Now, having worked with many different organizations over the last number of years, there are similar characteristics, I would say, for those that had managed to get through the pandemic, managed to respond to disruption, to variability, whether it be geopolitical reasons or otherwise. So for me, those key reasons were, first, a number of them had managed to adjust their supply chains and the way they work with their partners. So they'd moved from very fixed transport and logistic contracts and started to bring in more variable contracts and working with partners that can flex with their volumes, right? So very flexible and adaptive supply chain strategies, often using, you know, platform services, SaaS-based services. You know, and we've seen in many, many markets, you know, particularly in Asia Pacific, the rise of the Uberization of transport and logistics services. Yeah. So removing not all, but some of those fixed-based contracts, making them more variable, but working with flexible partners. The second characteristic, and we talk a lot about, and I've already heard it by a couple of presenters today, around integration and collaboration with the ecosystem of partners. So that's our supply base, that's our 3PLs, and all of our trading partners. So it's important to have that, you know, that data, that real-time supply chain data we're capturing, sharing it with our ecosystem of partners, right? Sharing those insights real time so we can respond together. But just as equally, it's collaboration internally, right? And I'll give you this classic example because we've all seen the rise of e-com through the pandemic, right? Where we've got that order to cash often breaks down. We're able to take the order online. If we're lucky, the system will have integrated with the finance module, if we're lucky, to tell us that there's actually goods on hand to sell to the customer. But quite often it breaks down because it hasn't actually integrated to the supply chain and therefore doesn't actually know where those goods are. So quite often these e-tailers are offering, 3-day, 5-day free delivery. That's because they don't understand that the goods are sitting in warehouses in DCs in other parts of the world. They're going to take much longer to get there. So quite often it's the value of internal collaboration and connection between commercial, finance and operations that makes a very resilient and responsive supply chain. Now, I heard Anna speak earlier about supply chain analytics. That end-to-end value chain, not supply chain, that end-to-end value chain visibility is a quite critical characteristic to enabling agility and responsiveness. And we've seen it. Now, having access to real-time supply chain analytics is easier said than done. I've been working with quite a few projects and really living this over the last 12 months. And it's not an easy thing to get, but when you do get it, it allows you to have that extended view, really understand early where those supply chain vulnerabilities, those risks are, and start to predict and proactively respond. Now, you can't stop, you can't change the fact that maybe a truck has left a DC a day later than you planned, or a ship has left 2 days later than you planned, or is held up by rough seas. There's nothing you can do about it. But if you've got that early indication and those early analytics and predict the outcome, the failure in the supply chain, it allows you to proactively do something about it. And then finally, what really enabled supply chains to survive and be more agile and resilient was the fact that they removed a lot of the redundant manual activities and started to replace them with automation. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, Anson, how much of an end-to-end supply chain was automated, it was somewhere between 10 to 30%, depending upon the node and the type of activity. It's now well and truly into 50, 60, 70%, depending upon which industry verticals we talk about. And again, we're talking a lot about international trade. Global trade management, best in class, was fully digitized 5 years ago. So anybody that's interacting using spreadsheets, still calling up their freight forwarders, getting paper documents, reconciling them, is well behind global best in class. But again, those leaders that moved to digitize trade management years ago really found the ability to respond quicker during the recent pandemic, where there's a lot of uncertainty and disruption.
Peter, excellent insights, my friend. And again, I really do appreciate your sharing. As you said, collaboration, that's really important. But we need to, and you talk about the value of internal collaboration, but also communicate. That's really, really important. And as you said, I think it is interesting, isn't it? The Uberization of transport and logistics. We are seeing all of these new players and these very asset-light players. They are disrupting, but we are going to come back to get your views on, how, about that disruption level. And what can the traditional players do about that? But Anna, I really wanted to get your views here, because you have been at the helm of GS1. I'm not going to talk about how long, but you have been at the helm of GS1 for a long, long time, since you were a very young girl. But you have seen things change. Can you share some of your thoughts around what have you seen with regards to those changes in supply chains, in logistics, in emerging technologies?
Thanks, Anson. Thanks for not disclosing, how long I have been. I can only say that I've known you for, 10, 15 years at least. Anyway, I think today, in terms of technology and digitization, this is a very important issue for business today, regardless you are a big or a small SMEs. And COVID has only accelerated the need of this what we call digital transformation. I think, imagine, with COVID, because of a lot of social distancing and things like that, even an SME, they have to rely and use social media, to outreach to their customers. They have to, in the past, if they just sell to the retailers, today, they really have to offer e-shop in order to support both offline and online. As you can see, shoppers are more prone to online shopping now. And for big companies, a lot of from GS1 Hong Kong perspective, over 85% of our members are SMEs. But we also have a lot of large organizations from different across industries. And I heard from my big members, the large companies, many of them have talked about, a boardroom agenda regarding digital transformation. They all set up, a dedicated group, a dedicated team, pulling from different across departments, across different units, all working on this cross-functional, digital transformation with the processes, how the technologies and can be applied, et cetera, et cetera. I think, apart from those, I wouldn't say, e-shop, social media, even Zoom today are so popular, but bigger organizations are moving to investing on like a lot of the robotic, the AGV for warehouse automation. These kind of things are not that usual before COVID in Hong Kong, I would say, because Hong Kong is actually too convenient. In Hong Kong, we have always been criticized that we are lagging behind the use of technology, isn't it, Anson? Because it's so, so convenient, and people are just busy in doing the business without really investing in. But in these 2-3 years, I see all these changes. So so in terms of when you say the emerging technologies, even from GS1 Hong Kong's history. It's very interesting to note that in the beginning, I would say, when we were first inaugurated in Hong Kong, our focus is very single objective, is to help the retail industry in automation using the barcode, a common globally adopted barcode, that's the product ID, for the entire retail point of sale system. Today is very different. Not only we have moved to B2B, I heard Regine saying, is it Regine? I think it's Regine also talking about the transactional, the document exchange. I think in the transport and logistics industry is very important. Same as for the FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods industry. Day-to-day exchange of PO, invoice, etc. That's already a step after barcode. But today we see even from a linear barcode, which only contains a product ID, now moving to 2D, which can store or can link to many more information, whether it's the certificate behind the product, whether it's the track and trace information, whether where the product is coming from, etc., etc. All can be linked under by what we call the GS1 standard, digital link standard, embedded in the URL of the QR code. It's a bit technical, but I don't want to elaborate on it. So, but at the same time, we also see traceability or visibility. Having a big draw of boardroom agenda, because I think whether you are talking about food sector, healthcare, food, of course, because we need to be careful of what kind of product we consume. So you need to know where the product is coming from. For healthcare, we all know we want to make sure that the vaccine, the type of vaccine is being applied to the right patient, and in case of anything, you'll be able to trace back. And I'm sure we have talked a lot about the logistics and transport, and the whole end-to-end supply chain visibility is very important. And that's why I see that all this emerging technology, as time goes by, it will evolve. But one thing I truly believe that GS1 can contribute is really the global standard, because today's supply chain management is, in my opinion, have to do collaboration. Everyone talk about it. Digitization. Again, without digitization, we can't do the third thing, which is connectivity. We need to connect everyone, all the stakeholders in the supply chain, in order to do the three major things in effective supply chain management: information flow, goods flow, and funds flow. So with all this, without the standard, without the global supply chain data standards to identify, to share, as well as to track and trace and the document exchange. And effective supply chain would not be, it's very difficult. And this is really the role of GS1 globally, to help across industry to do something like that.
Thank you, Anna. Really, again, appreciate your sharing. As you said, collaboration, connectivity, these are all very key messages that we need to be thinking about. Bill, you've been very patient over in Berlin. I did want to get your views because we have seen a number of factors emerge in manufacturing, in sourcing, in supply chains. We need to consider a lot of things these days with these more complex supply chains. We heard from Neale that one of the key reasons for shifting is the rise of geopolitics. I just kind of wanted to get your views. What can we expect in the next couple of years? Looking forward, 2023, 24, 25 and beyond, what are we going to expect? Because, you have been on the ground and I think you've got a unique view from the political side as well as the business side.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anson. I think, first of all, if we look forward the next couple of years, I think we can expect that governments in many parts of the world will continue to prioritize national security and also economic security, in many cases, over the commercial interests of their companies. And this will shape both the strategic as well as the operative environment for companies in the coming years, far more than I think we have experienced in collective memory in the last generation or so. And when governments look at commerce through the prism of national and economic security, they also hone in on supply chains very, very clearly. And we are seeing some emerging trends, actions that governments are taking now that will have very important repercussions for company supply chains around the world. Let me cite several European examples, just as a case in point. Here we heard earlier how stakeholders care more and more about the integrity of products, about the quality of products, about ESG. Well, we see that is also shaping legislation. So several countries here in Europe already have supply chain laws, and you're going to be seeing more in the future. A very, very important one is here in Germany. So as of January 1st of the coming year, a new law will require German companies, as well as the foreign companies that have a branch presence in Germany, to pay far more attention to their supply chains. Also then to provide far more transparency into their supply chains, to create due diligence and risk management procedures to understand what their supply chains, and then to publish then these what they are doing. And this law is very, very focused on labor conditions and environmental conditions. And the goal is to ensure that any German company that is selling products here, or the foreign branches of, or the German branches of foreign companies, are selling goods in Germany that are free of either forced labor or slave labor, child labor, and also environmental problems. So this law will go into effect, as I mentioned, on January 1st. It will first apply for large companies, I think companies with more than 3,000 employees, but then later it will apply to companies with fewer employees as well. So that's one example. Secondly, the European Commission has also earlier this year issued a draft, a draft directive. This is also a proposal for a European Union-wide supply chain law. And it's just a draft at the moment. The next step is that it would go into the European Parliament, be approved by the European Parliament, then go to the Council of Ministers, who would then approve it. And then individual European Union members would have 2 years, I believe, to implement it into their national laws. And this law requires many of the same things that the German law requires. Namely, companies have to document that they have a supply chain due diligence organization and mechanism in their companies. They have to document that they have a risk management and risk mitigation system in place. There are requirements on how they publicize this type of information. And very, very importantly, if passed as drafted, this law would not only require companies to report about their own supply chains, but also the supply chains of their partners. So these are two examples where you will see companies, European companies, and that will also reverberate through their partners across the Asia-Pacific region as well in the coming years. There will be a heightened demand for supply chain transparency, a heightened demand for information, a heightened demand from European companies expecting their partners to be able to report, document that their supply chains are free of forced labor, and then adhere to environmental standards. So that is one set of one trend we are seeing. A second is that, again, getting back to the to the idea that governments are looking at supply chains through the prism of national and economic security. We see measures now being taken. A good example of this is the Biden administration just in September announced a new new regulations on biotechnology and biosecurity. And there very, very explicitly, there are a number of programs that are foreseen with funding to either onshore supply chains in certain materials that are deemed critical in the biotech sphere, either for consumers or for national security and for defense. Or there will be enhanced transparency requirements as well. We see also that industrial policy moves by the United States or the European Union to incentivize the relocation of research and development and manufacturing in high-end semiconductors. These measures also, in order to get government funding for example, to build a semiconductor factory here, or to get government funding for research and development here, will be contingent upon either reshoring certain types of supply chains or ensuring that those supply chains are reliable and resilient and flexible from a national and economic security point of view.
Bill,
so these are trends.
Bill, that's fascinating. That is really fascinating in terms of those insights. So what I'm hearing from you is expect more regulation.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Regulation is coming. Regulation's coming from the EU. It's coming from Germany, as you said, new laws in Germany. Last week at Made in Asia with the French Chamber, we heard from the member of the European Parliament, Pascal Canfin, and Pascal was also talking about the EU I think, drafting around 50 different laws. So that is absolutely very clear. We can expect a lot more regulation. We're going to see those governments, as you said, Bill, hone in on those supply chains.
And if I could add,
yes, Bill.
If I could just add, Anson, but this also presents new opportunities for supply chain partners, right? So, if a company can say, hey, listen, I have transparent supply chains, I can provide you with the information that you need in the form that you need it for your own compliance requirements, then those will be competitive advantages for companies along the supply chains in the future.
Good point, Bill. So as one door closes, another one opens. But as you said, with that added regulation, there's also going to be more opportunities. And again, if you are a good corporate citizen, and if you get this right, there are significant benefits. Bill, I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes because I've got a lot more questions for you. But I just want to turn to Regine, because Regine, we've heard about what's going on in shipping and logistics. We've heard about China +1, China +2, China +3. How about, what are you seeing? What are some of those trends? I think in particular, we see some interesting trends around intra-Asia routes. And I just wanted to see, are you seeing an increased focus on places like Vietnam, on South Asia? We see that potentially India is up and coming. I know, talking to some of my clients, Bangladesh is quite a key market for the European Union. But there are still issues around infrastructure.
Right. So first of all, in the context we've been talking about today, China +1, +2, but also in the context of the growing consumer market across Asia, definitely the intra-Asia routes are in the core of every customer's and every business planning, right? Now, in the China +1, +2, we should not only be looking at the finished goods shipping here, but also the components shipping. So obviously, every companies today are looking at how to control as well of the planning around of the components, the raw materials, or the input materials, right, to production. So this is, in fact, bringing a new dimension, right, of the intra-Asia routes into the overall supply chain. Bangladesh is definitely very well positioned in the fashion, right, in the lifestyle production. However, a very important point, and not to forget about Bangladesh, is that 90% of the cotton that they are, in fact, they need to manufacture the products that they are exporting needs to be imported. So all in all, the intra-Asia, it's not only about finished goods shipping to the consumers, right? But it's also about the entire focus on these on the materials. Now, obviously, the infrastructure here is behind, and maybe I'll take a few seconds here to talk about about Vietnam itself, right? Vietnam is there is an obvious gap between the current infrastructure and the aspiration of Vietnam to be a fast-growing business. Few points that I've been reading, and I spent a month this summer in Vietnam, really to be visiting our customers, understanding, in fact, the overall manufacturing ecosystems. What I do understand is that as per the global infrastructure hub, Vietnam needs approximately $25 to $30 billion per year to develop the infrastructure to ensure this economic growth that they are aspiring to. And today, the infrastructure has been primarily funded by the public funds. And but the national budget can only cover, in fact, a fraction of this, can only cover about 15 billion. So definitely here, Vietnam needs to get more international funds to support this growth. And a critical step, in fact, has been taken by Vietnam, whereby they are now opening private fundings, right, to support this infrastructure growth. Now, infrastructure, before we talk about ports infrastructure, let's talk about the road infrastructure, right? And that's, in fact, the nerve of the overall logistics. You need, in fact, to get all of these containers, those goods, shipped from an industrial zone to the ports, to the airports, to the railways. And priority today, it's on the road infrastructure. And they are critical investment. And I think the largest one is that highway connecting, in fact, Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh, which should represent a highway of approximately 1,800 kilometers. This is enormous, right?
Yeah.
And definitely, Vietnam is looking at this road, in fact, infrastructure reinforcement. Now, road infrastructure goes obviously with the entire transit for passengers. We can't only look at the road to transport goods when we don't look at how to clear the roads in a way from all of the commuting, all of the passengers commuting. So at the same time, in fact, Vietnam is looking at the public transit development. And it's not, in fact, an area where there is a lot of attracting a lot of investment, because it's a very low return on profits. So there are some, I would say, great initiatives in terms of developing, in fact, metro lines. In Hanoi, there is a first metro line. The one in Ho Chi Minh should be opening in Q3 2023. It's been going through a few delays here. But obviously, looking at all of these, the transportation is an overall, in fact, context of goods, but also on people. International airports is also a very big investment here for Vietnam. There are about 12 international airports in Vietnam, but only 5 of them are today, in fact, meeting the world standards. So focus here for Vietnam, it's all about standardizing, in fact, more of these 12 international airports to meet the criteria of the world, in fact, standards for airports. So focus is about the capacity upgrading. And Vietnam is doing this, I would say, very gradually. So Vietnam is a good example, but well, if we talk about India, some also extraordinary example here. But all in all, my message here will be that it's not only about public investment, private investment, it's also about the governance and the project planning and the compliance of all of the management company behind those projects to deploy as planned. And we all know that sometimes it doesn't go that way, right? For lack of efficiency of the management team behind those infrastructure, or maybe some, unfortunately, corruptions or deviations of funds. So priority, the message to me in terms of this and in terms of the infrastructure development, is really about the governance.
Good, so many good points. I'm not quite sure where we can unpack all of those different points, but it certainly sounds as though Vietnam needs some good consultants. So Peter, are you ready to make that move from Melbourne to Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi, my friend?
Again, yes.
But I do think that's important, isn't it? Infrastructure is a very key message for all of us. And, you know, you've got to build that infrastructure, and it takes a long time. And as you said, Vietnam needs, I think you mentioned 25 to 30 billion dollars in investment on infrastructure. So again, fascinating, really fascinating stuff. Would you believe it? We're running out of time, and I've still got so many questions that I wanted to ask. Peter, I just wanted to get your views, because you look at the retail sector, you look at the consumer sector, you look at life sciences. In fact, you're the leader as well for life sciences here in the Asia Pacific region. What are you seeing in terms of manufacturing shifts? I know you've been spending a heck of a lot of time in Singapore. We know, we can see that kind of Singapore has become this hub, but any other things that you're seeing?
Absolutely, yeah, Anson. And look, the exciting part about life sciences right now is the innovation around precision medicine, right, which is personalized healthcare, because this really is transforming the entire life sciences sector, and we're on the cusp of a very major change for pharmaceutical companies. And we're talking about, not manufacturing billions of doses of vaccines or pills to push from, Europe, North America, across the global markets. We're now talking one for one, right? And this has a major impact on manufacturing, on where to set up locations and supply chain flows. Because with that one-to-one, you need very, very well, controlled serialization of the batch. You need end-to-end traceability to control who's handling it, in what condition. So custodianship through the supply chain. You need speed, from that biomass taken by the GP to the manufacturing site and returned back to the GP to be implanted back into the patient. So, today we have global manufacturing making billions of doses to push drugs and vaccines around the world market. In the future, and this is where we're just starting to change, as gene therapy really starts to take off in the world, and especially in Asia, it'll be localized manufacturing. So we'll start with nearshoring, because the big life sciences, the pharma companies, are creating their first hubs. And as they get market scale, then they'll create local onshoring manufacturing. So ultimately, the markets will determine which locations have local manufacturing. But watch this space, Anson. Over the next 5 to 10 years, we will see significant manufacturing investment in Asia, in Southeast Asia, to support this radical new precision medicine.
Wow, Peter, that's amazing, isn't it? So as you said, we're truly here in terms of the technology, the innovation, the precision medicine, the smart manufacturing. We're going to see that. And as you said, Peter, we're going to see that across Asia, right? We're going to see that across Southeast Asia. I mean, is Vietnam going to be significant? Any other markets? I know that Singapore is going to be a very key hub, but any other areas that you see?
Yeah, look, initially, if you look at the the first to market, the big multinationals that are here in Asia Pacific, so they're obviously attracted. Yes, Singapore as the hub for Asia initially, but they're first to market will be the big market. So it will be China for China. It will be Japan for Japan, Korea for Korea, and potentially Australia for Australia. Singapore will initially support Southeast Asia, but as Southeast Asia, as these markets get scale, that's when it's going to become really interesting. So yes, I mean, the nice thing about Vietnam is they have a very proactive government driving healthcare policy and reform. They're opening up incentives to get life sciences manufacturers into the country, as is Indonesia, as are other parts of Southeast Asia. So look, time will tell. It may not be in the first 5 to 10 years, Anson, but absolutely, within 1 to 2 decades, you would expect to see Southeast Asian countries also enjoy setting up these very innovative manufacturing, life sciences industry ecosystems.
Peter, fascinating stuff. And again, I really appreciate your great insights, because I know that you've really been driving that life sciences market as well. I've got a couple of questions for Bill and for Anna, but I'm going to start with you, Bill. You spent 5 years in Beijing, working at that government level. There is a lot of political noise right now. But I also know that people like yourselves, professionals like yourselves, you've dedicated your career to really build on those US-China relationships. Are you optimistic about the future? I mean, what should we be thinking about as businessmen and businesswomen? What are the key messages?
Yeah, first of all, I am indeed optimistic about the future. The truth is that strategic distrust and strategic competition will continue to shape the U.S.-China relationship. I think that is structural. It has many, many reasons, and it doesn't really depend on who is in power in either country. So expect more competition, expect the friction, expect the headlines that are associated with that. At the same time, I think the latest meeting between President Biden and President Xi demonstrated that the two sides do not want that distrust and that competition to descend into conflict and confrontation. So I do expect that they will make efforts to contain that distrust, to respect each other's red lines, and to exercise sufficient strategic restraint to ensure that the relationship, as it were, does not go off the rails. What this means for companies is that they need to understand the dynamics in that relationship, and they need to understand how then both governments are then making decisions that will shape their environment moving forward. That is sometimes a new way of thinking for corporate executives. It is not necessarily a commercial way of thinking. Quite often, as we have seen with examples on both sides, that governments will make decisions that impose economic costs, not only on the other side, but on their own companies and their own citizens. So having an understanding of these geopolitical trends and how they impact the environment will be really, really important moving forward. I think companies that do that and otherwise have all of the savvy is necessary, to do well and compete in China have a bright future in front of them.
Thanks, Bill, and that's good to know. It's good to know that someone like yourself, and you've been working at the coalface. You've been working on those US-China relations, but equally, it's good to hear that you are still optimistic, despite, as you said, all the noise that is going on. But you made a really good point that, again, companies, we need to understand about those dynamics. As you said, it's not always a commercial way of thinking, but we do need to be aware of these geopolitical issues as well. So again, thank you for that. Anna, I just wanted to also get your views, because you and I have been talking about the Greater Bay Area, GBA. I mentioned earlier on 86 million people across the Greater Bay Area. Hong Kong, I believe, is going to be a very important link with that Greater Bay Area. Are you excited as well about GBA? Equally, are you excited about the ASEAN opportunities?
Of course, not just from a GS1 perspective, also from my membership-based perspective. I think after all, Hong Kong is a very international city. We do need to expand our geographical territory or business in order to grow the business. So Greater Bay GBA definitely offers a much bigger market and also very close to Hong Kong. I think in terms of the as we did the recent survey, what we are trying to look into the GBA opportunity is to look at, for example, whether there would be better integration or leveraging like the talent. Hong Kong right now, we also need more talent. Shortage of talent, whether we have a bigger supply, and also whether we can leverage on some tax benefits, hopefully with this GBA strategy, as well as for technology. We all know that I think certain cities in mainland China, like Shenzhen, they are pretty good in some technological application. They have a much bigger market. But I think the integration between Hong Kong with within the GBA will give us both access to a much bigger target market, as well as a bigger opportunity to leverage. For ASEAN, same situation. Our members are also keen to expand to those markets. And in fact, from GS1, even from GS1 Hong Kong perspective, we have a different initiative. A very recent one is to work with Vietnam in terms of cross-border traceability for food products. The technical infrastructure is already there. The next step is really how to engage both sides, the food manufacturers in Vietnam and then the importers in Hong Kong. How can we scale up? Because a few years ago, we have done under the APEC project, Asia Pacific Economic APEC, right? We have done this global data standards project across different economies across Asia Pacific. So the reason Hong Kong, Vietnam food traceability is try to look into how we can scale up and replicate to other ASEAN countries as well.
Anna, that's excellent. And again, it's a great example, working, as you said, Hong Kong companies working with their counterparts in Vietnam to really look at things like food traceability. And as we know, consumers are demanding far greater transparency on those supply chains. It's not just governments, it's also the consumers. Neale, we are running out of time. We've still got a few minutes left. I also just got a note from Mike Walsh, the chief executive, who said, the conversation's so good, we can keep talking a little bit longer. Wow. And big thumbs up to everyone. It's a fascinating conversation. But Neale, just want to get your thoughts, because we heard about Vietnam. We hear about location. Are you seeing any particular locations that are interesting in your views? And I also want to talk to you about the impact of those US-China trade tensions.
Yeah, with regard to location, there's always, I think the new area is just North Vietnam is just starting to really develop their ecosystem. And kind of Shenzhen is the model, really, because it's combining education, it's combining high-end, low-end labor, and also manufacturing and design. So, that's a model for other nations to follow. Vietnam, North Vietnam, they're building up their infrastructure, attracting a lot of electronics area in North Vietnam, and that wasn't around 5, 6, 7 years ago. Johor in Malaysia, Dyson never ever manufactured in China, manufactured in Johor with Flextronics, and now Bissell, the oldest vacuum cleaner manufacturer in the world, it's 125, 130 years old now. It's privately owned. They've moved to Johor in Malaysia. These are things that governments of different nations, they should be jumping up with joy and using these as role models for expanding their infrastructure. The big challenge, if I can just dovetail into one of the challenges that the different governments have in Asia, is the hygiene factors like health, education, but also talent mobility. So we've got the education affects talent mobility and also transport. For example, Malaysia at one stage was actually talking about building a third car manufacturing plant. And I was talking to one of the ministers a few years ago. I said, you should be getting the train link between KL and Singapore, because that will add to talent mobility. And when you have more mobile talent, then you can bring in more design, you have higher end infrastructure and ecosystems to attract more FDI. So it's all connected, the infrastructure, the mobility, the education, talent. I tell governments, just when combined FDI with education, look what RMIT University is doing in Vietnam, is educating the future management of global trade right as we speak today. But going back to the trade war, these things will come and go. Cambodia lost its favored nation status with Europe several years ago, but these things will come and go. But then people are moving to Cambodia because now it's rolling out the red carpet with tax incentives, as is Vietnam, Indonesia, and India.
Absolutely. Neale, again, thank you very much for some great sharing there. And very interesting, as you said, about North Korea. Sorry, North
Vietnam.
Vietnam. I get that right. Interesting about what you said about North Vietnam in terms of combining the low end labor market with the high end labor market and offering a range of services. And as you said, the big challenges: health, education, talent mobility. I hear you, and educating the future management. That's
just
really,
to add to that, the immigration is so critical. Like Australian government has a really good immigration policy. If you go and study at university there, you can stay for several years after graduating. Malaysia does not. And so then that affects the attraction of people to come to your country. So immigration has a great role to play. Education has a great role to play. We cannot talk about sustainability if we're not talking about educating the future people that are going to manage and work in factories.
Okay, good point, Neale. Very good point. That's important. The education policies, but also those immigration policies as well. Now, we're out of time, but I've still got a couple of other questions, as always. Neale, I'm going to put you on the spot, and Bill, with those US-China trade tensions, you know, they continue to ramp up. Neale, is China finished?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No. The consumer will dominate the whole region in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Love that point. The consumer will dominate. Bill, going to throw out to you. Obviously, I've got to throw out to you. Is China finished? Is it the end? Finito Benito.
Of course not, Anson. China is the second largest economy in the world, at the heart of the most dynamic region in the world. Despite all of the geopolitical tensions we hear, despite indeed the decoupling that you will see in certain sectors that governments deem are critical for national or economic security, we will see that the vast majority of trade going back and forth in the region to and from China is fully innocuous from a security point of view. China is by all means a market of the future, as it has been in the past generation.
Okay, great, Bill. I just thought I'd ask you that question. But it is interesting, as you said, the consumer will dominate, and those Chinese consumers are still very much alive and kicking. And we're now seeing those ASEAN consumers also starting to come of age as well. We're out of time, but Regine, a couple of questions before we go. Earlier on, I talked about purpose-led companies, about the importance of ESG and sustainability. Is that important to you as well as your clients?
Totally. I think it's, if I may summarize, is a license to operate. Having a very clear program, a very clear ESG program and sustainability program is definitely detrimental here, right, to be visible in the market. So yeah, our clients, in fact, wants to get support in aggregating data, in translating, in fact, the data that they do have across their supply chain into a very clear and standardized, right, CO2 emission reporting. And yeah, we are definitely here on that journey, is to help that to generate this visibility. And with the visibility, then you can make some recommendation. And then when you have recommendation, then you can really act, right, on how to improve the CO2 or reduce, I would say, the CO2 emission.
Great, but there is a lot of greenwashing out there.
Yes,
yeah.
Well, absolutely. I think continuously reporting how you are delivering what you are committing is what matters today, right? And the consumers are very alert in reading those the actions, the deliverables, and I would say, yeah, it's a lot of greenwashing. Agree with you, but standardizing the reporting and supporting, in fact, all the companies today needs to get, we talk a lot about talent, but the right talent to be able, in fact, to activate those data.
Absolutely. Peter, just to bring you in, my friend, you talk to a lot of corporate clients as well. Are you hearing the same thing? Is it important about being purpose-led companies, ESG and sustainability? Are they just buzzwords, or are we seeing real action?
We are seeing real action, but to Regine's point, you need that visibility. You know, if you take supply chain, if you really get that end-to-end visibility of how your product really moves through the supply chain, only then can you understand where and whom with you can work with to decarbonize your supply chain, where your high energy nodes or assets are, where your waste, where your plastic use is. So you need that end-to-end visibility. Can I close that, Anson, just by sharing with you that in Australia, KPMG appointed a chief purpose officer last year, help us lead our organization, obviously towards being more purpose-led, such that we have a greater positive impact. Now for us, that means we grow, we transform with our people, our clients, but also our communities in mind. So we respect our Indigenous cultures. We're mindful of the environment and how we interact with people. So we're also, you know, and when we say people, we're accepting now the diversity of our staff, people that we interact with, that our clients, and also our communities. And I can tell you, every single one of the 700 partners in the Australian firm has this as part of the strategy. It's in our goals, and we are absolutely delivering towards it. So yeah, it's a huge initiative for us in Australia.
Great to hear, Peter. And as you said, we hear about chief procurement officers. I think that's the first time that we've heard about the chief purpose officer. Just before, Mike, I'm not too sure, Mike, are you there, Mike? Before you go,
I am. I'm here.
Hold on for 1 second, because suddenly my screen has gone grey. Thank you, Mike. Just before, final thoughts. We're out of time, but Mike's letting us have a few more extra minutes. I just want to get final comments from everybody. You know, I love buzzwords, but what is your key message to all of those hundreds of delegates that have joined us today, this morning at PBEC Dialogue Summit? What is your key message to everyone today? I'm going to start with ladies. Regine, what's your key message?
Producing the talents of tomorrow. And putting focus on the education. We need more education around supply chain. Supply chain was maybe not sitting at the table before; it's sitting at the table now, and obviously the right engineers and the right business people, in fact, to act on sustainability. Yeah, that will be for me the most.
Okay, great. And supply chain has a seat at the table today. Producing the talent for tomorrow. Love it. Anna, what's your key message to everyone today?
Again, back to supply chain first, I think we really need to refocus on supply chain, especially in globalization. So my three key words for supply chain: collaboration, digitization, and connectivity. But within that, we have to bring out that we need to be consumer focused, and ESG and talent. These are the supporting components for us to run a very effective supply chain.
Great point. Sorry, you said collaboration, digitization,
and connectivity.
Connectivity, right? And obviously,
another word actually to me is transparency. I also like that transparency.
Okay.
Okay.
Lots of messages there. Bill, what's your key message?
My key message, Anson, is that companies should really understand how governments view supply chains from a national and economic security point of view.
Good point, Bill. Good point. Neale?
My key message is obviously thinking about FDI, that we need to encourage more FDI that is aligned or partnering with education, because Southeast Asia will develop with greater education of the next generation, and then that will supply into talent, which will make the supply chains much more sustainable, much more visible in the future.
Excellent. And Peter, my friend, what are your final thoughts?
So obviously, supply chain transformation is part of the enterprise-wide digital transformation journey, Anson, is quite significant. So for me, it's all about business-led transformation enabled by the technologies, digital enabled, not the other way around. But of course, purpose-led transformation. Yeah. Don't be afraid, be brave to engage with the parties within your ecosystem that may be a little bit risky, but do so knowing that you can help them to change as well. And that will have a huge impact, not just on your value chain and your ecosystem, but also impact on the communities and customers and stakeholders that you supply into.
Peter, excellent way to end this conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure to talk to all of you at this PBEC Dialogue Summit and on our roundtable around Unchained Global Sourcing, charting a new course in Asia Pacific. And I have to say a massive thank you to all of my esteemed panel members, Dr. Professor Neale O'Connor from Monash University, Regine Picard from AP Moller Maersk, Anna Lin from GS1 Hong Kong, Bill Klein from FGS Consulting Partners, and of course, my old buddy, Peter Liddell from KPMG in Australia. And of course, on behalf of myself, Anson Bailey, as the moderator, I want to wish everybody a great day wherever you are, whichever part of Asia Pacific you reside in. Let's make sure that we are having those conversations, that we are collaborating, that we're communicating, that we are connecting. There are a lot of opportunities here today. So on that note, I want to say a big thank you for staying with us. And that is the end of our PBEC roundtable discussion, but we will be back at 2 p.m. today for the next session. And again, I think the next session, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be talking about things like water, the blue economy, and how we're going to deal with things like water scarcity, very important issues. So on that note, have a great day. Thank you very much. Stay tuned and please get connected with the PBEC team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, it's really warm. It's like